Let's do it. Let's talk about some analytics. Um, I am Jonathan Schuster. I'm a GM over at Unacast. I'm also the Chief Product Officer. Been around this data for quite a long time, so I'm pretty psyched for what we're going to get to talk about today. Lyden, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is Lyden Faust. I am the co-founder and CEO of Spatial.
Cool. This has been a cool partnership to work on. I'm really excited for what you're going to see today. So here's the agenda for the day. I want to talk a little bit about why what we're talking about is unique and why the underpinnings of this are hard. I think it sets the table for really what we're going to go through and what when we show what you can do with this data, what's really there. Talk about what the partnership is and why together, it's peanut butter and chocolate makes Reese's, which are like the best thing ever. Um, Talk a little bit about segmentation and that data landscape. And then we're going to let you see the goods, right? We'll show you a little bit of spatial, show you a little bit of unicast and what's possible there. And then to round things out, we'll talk with Mal, and Mal's a data scientist over at Unicast. And we're going to talk about some of the things as data scientists and as folks that actually have to live with and work with the data, what they need to think about. Cool. All right, let's get going. Okay, so let's just start here for a second. Geospatial data is hard. It's really, really hard. Understanding how people move through the world is very, very difficult. And part of the reason it's so difficult is because it's noisy. Some of the data is just spotty in how you get it. Some of it's got bad data in it. Some of it's misconfigured. And you get these weird, erroneous readings on top of really good data all over the place. And that's really tough to deal with. Because if what we're really trying to do is understand where do people go in real life, right? How do people move through the universe? It's a really hard problem to solve. If we try to do that with just the raw data by itself, it's tough because you end up with a completely unnormalized data set that will tell you things that might be true and might not be true. And you have a lot of work to do to munge that data to get that data to a place that it makes sense. And adding to that, if you then want to join other data sets on top of it to give that data meaning of how people move through the universe, joining geospatial data to psychographic data, not to mention even the creation of psychographic data, is tough. And now you're linking varying data sets, right? You're linking a data set that describes people and a data set that describes movement. And so, okay, let's say that you've got all the brains in the world to like go do this stuff, right? And then you want to go do it. It's really expensive to do too. It requires crazy processing power because you're really trying to describe all kinds of people and you're trying to describe all kinds of movement. What we've done together is we've taken the power of both of our companies and we've made this easy, right? We've normalized the data sets and we've pulled the data sets together so that the folks working with the data can do what they're actually trying to do, which is get insights from the data and learn something new from the data. Nobody wants to spend all their time cleaning data. Everybody wants to spend their time actually working with the data to see what can it actually tell me. So one of the coolest things about Unicast and Spatial working together, it's how much this stuff is the same for both of us, and we just come at it from different angles. And so we thought we'd take a sec to say, well, like, what do you do with location intelligence? And Leiden, in a sec here, I'm going to ask you to just like pile on to what I say with this too. But like, at the base level, it's human mobility, understanding how people move through the real world, right? We have all the tooling in the world to figure out, where does somebody go on my website? When do they exit a basket on the website without completing it? Trying to do that as people walk through a Target or a Hy-Vee or a Walmart, that's really, really, really hard. There is no orchestration tool set for that. And there's definitely no orchestration tool set to figure that out of where do they go next and where do they come from and what kind of people are they? To pull it all together just doesn't exist because they're real people moving in the real world with real complexity. Some of the other stuff you end up doing with it then is ad targeting, right? How do I hit the right people at the right time? site selection. For example, if I'm a retailer, where do I put my next location? Also, which locations aren't working for me? Competitive intelligence. I might be a brand who has all the information in the world about my own customers. How do I understand what's happening down the street at my competitors' locations? I got news for you, for folks, like the days of counting cars in parking lots, that's just scratching the surface of what we can learn. How do I get deeper customer insights? How do I really know what folks are interested in, what they might be interested in going forward? Retail strategy, right? It's not just where do I put my store, it's what do I put in my store. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. It's when is my store open and when is my store not open? When do the folks come in to fix the air conditioning, right? That stuff matters. And then core investment decisions. When I see something that's kind of working on the bleeding edge of working, how do I double down? And where do I double down? Or where do I pull back? Leiden, what else would you add on this?
I think you captured a lot there. I would say two things at the very high level. One would be market share. So understanding how much market share I have versus my competitors or anybody that is relevant, or even co-tenants, collaborative, different types of retailers that we can work with. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do with all this information is make a really clear story for our senior leaders, if we are retail analysts, to have confidence in the decisions that they are making. Because we as an analyst, we might be able to see the right decisions through the data. Sometimes it's really hard to communicate to a senior leader. This makes it extremely explicit and clear to them what to do.
Very cool. So I realized something as we're talking about this. Leiden and I live this every day because we talk with clients every day about the possibilities of this and what folks are doing and what's working for them. Not everybody on this call might realize that. I want to encourage folks to ask questions as we go through, and we should have some time at the end to drop in on some of those. You can use the Q&A function. If you drop something in the chat, that'll work too. We'll see it. We've got some folks on here to help keep us honest with all of this. I got to do the Unicast pitch for a second. I think it's required of me everywhere I go, including family dinners. So I thought, you know, there's a lot of location data folks out there dealing with location intelligence. You know, what we tend to lean in on is being really reliable, being really transparent. When we find data in the ecosystem, as the ecosystem is always changing, we're trying to be as transparent as possible. What do we really see that's going on here? What seems legit? What seems weird, right? Being highly flexible with the data sets so that they can fit. We know that folks are using these data sets to build models for themselves, and that means flexibility for that. We don't have to just adhere to one concrete thing if that ingest pattern's not going to work for you. So we do a lot with that. Accuracy for our model data sets, especially, which is what we're going to talk a lot about in here. And, you know, I think I'd be remiss without talking about privacy for a second. The location intelligence space and the location analytics space, rightfully comes under a lot of scrutiny around privacy. Everything you're going to see here runs through our privacy check platform. And what that means is if you're going to attach Unicast data to anything else, the only data you will get out of Unicast is data that has already been privacy cleansed. That means that things like data on K through 12 schools, you can't get it in our platform. You won't get it from our platform because that data is blocked from our platform. Things like prisons, you will not get that data from our platform. It is not accessible from our platform. We have built all of our products with privacy by design in place specifically to make the products so they're highly usable and flexible for legitimate purposes. And legitimate purposes are things like what we described on the previous slide. I want to make sure I hit the right category of folks to build an ad campaign. I want to understand the trends of my business versus your business. Not, I want to understand, did Jonathan go to that specific Walmart? That's not legitimate interest, and our platform prevents that.
Cool. A
So
little bit
talk a little
about,
about spatial.
yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit about spatial. So spatial is a household level segmentation. So think about this. Every single address in the United States receives one of 80 different behavioral segments. And the way that we segment people is unique. Use 3 factors. 1, social media. What do they follow? What do they hashtag? Second, where do they visit? Their mobile phone device visitation information. What types of retail are they going to? Third thing that we use is their demographic data, age, income, marital status, etc. All that flows in to create the personalized segmentation. It creates a segmentation that is not only quantitatively more predictive than a demographics only segmentation, it's also qualitatively more interesting and can lead to deeper insights.
Very cool. So as you can kind of guess, like what I was talking about a little earlier in terms of this stuff's really hard. So spatial, right? They're looking at all of these users and all of these devices to build the segments. You can imagine the processing power that it takes to do that. In Unicast, we're looking at the patterns of lots and lots of folks as they move through the universe, and we combine that. And so bringing this together is what makes this pretty fun. And that gets me here. Go
As
for
it,
it.
yeah, as it relates to the 2 data sets combined, Unicast is powerful for understanding where things are happening, when they're happening, and then how many visits, for example. And that's really powerful on its own. But when you combine it with segmentation, it gives you an additional aspect to it that was always happening. We just didn't have a lens to it, which is who are the people behind the devices visiting a location in a fully privacy compliant manner. And then finally, if we understand who and behaviorally who those people are, we can understand why they are making the decisions that they are making. And what does that mean for us? Ultimately, that means actionable insights, because now we can differentiate, okay, these 3 sites had similar visitation, but were the people visiting those sites different? Were they behaviorally different, even more than just their demographics? And what might that mean for us as far as how do we take action? What story do we sell to our superiors?
Cool. Len, if you spend a minute or two talking about the segmentation data landscape, I think that'll help ground this.
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to understanding how to segment our customer data, our mobile data, our physical retail locations, we have a number of ways that we can kind of tackle this. I just put the top 3 here. One is census data, which is the study of people based on their demographic attributes. So this is the basic stuff, age, income, based on the attributes of the block group. And typically when this is done with attaching to mobile data, we're looking at the median demographics of a device's home location. That's powerful, and you should always start there. One way to level up, and what people started asking are, who are the people behind these devices? So they started using psychographic data, which is the study of people based on where they live. Typically, psychographic data sets will take a cluster of demographically similar people, and then we'll go to the next level and apply survey data to those demographics. It's usually the survey's MRI, Survey of the American Consumer, to see how those people might behave based on how similar demographic people respond to a survey. And this is where we felt like there was a big opportunity. And that's why we came up with the personalized data set, which is the study of people based on what they actually do. We're no longer using surveys to see what these people are doing. We can actually just look at what are they following on social media? What types of retail are they physically actually visiting? And we segment them based on that. Why is that important? Because you can have 2 people that are demographically the same, yet interested in very different things. And that plays out to be very important in the business.
Cool. Luden, I think this is your cue to give us a little look behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of understand a behavioral segmentation is actually to see the segmentation in real time. So again, this is the personalized segmentation. Like I mentioned, every address is segmented into one of these 80 behavioral segments. And just to simplify them, every segment is grouped up into 17 higher level groups, like something very obvious, like ultra wealthy families, wealthy suburban families, I'm just going to go down here to blue collar suburbs, and we'll jump into this segment to see what can we learn about people based on the segment that they are. What can we learn about a device based on the location that it came from? Okay, so blue collar suburbs, we can see a short description of these folks: age, income, the number of households in the US. And that's what you would expect from a typical segmentation, but this is where it gets very different. All of this is live in real time. So we can see, what are these people talking about right now using the last 2 weeks of viral hashtags with all the people that are in this segment. So these people in particular are talking about The Walking Dead right now. You can see the top retail visitation. This is based on their device visitation. This is coming from Unicast. We can see the websites they visit, their channel preferences, if you're considering how to market to them, and then the overall household size. And this is just an overview. You can go into detail of all of this. All this is live, so you can track it throughout time. You can see the geographies where these people show up and make up the dominant portion of the people in those neighborhoods or census block groups. You can really blow out in-store visitation. So if you're trying to understand what type of fitness visitation these people have, they go to Esporta, Athletic Republic. If you want to get real specific, you can say, no, I only want to know about these people in New York City. And you'll see in New York City specifically, they're going to Gold Gym, which means they're not going to high budget gyms for these people. You can see the brands that they follow on social media. We don't know if they're visiting these brands. All we know is that they are following these brands. It can be cut up by beauty, grocery, food visitation. So what are these people drinking? Well, these people are the kind of people that would buy Monster Energy, G Fuel, Mountain Dew. Channel preferences, these are the channels that you would reach them based on what they're following on Twitter. So we can see the podcasts that they're following, the top news publishers to do ad placements. You got social topics, the influencers that influence these people, web visitation, demographics, and then finally personalized, which is essentially, that's a lot of data. If you're a data analyst, you love that. But if you're somebody taking action on that and you just need a brief overview, the personalized is what you want to do to understand these people. So we see these people, for example, some key traits, lifestyle imagery. We have breweries because we know that these people over-index on following different breweries and beer brands, and actually physically visit those types of locations as well. Their top interests, we see these people are RV enthusiasts, the brands they follow, and campaigns that have performed well for these people. So ultimately, what you get is a deeper understanding than, okay, there are 100 visits to the site. It's who are those visits coming from?
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so I gotta ask for folks that are in here, just like key into that like blue collar suburbs thing for just remember that because we're gonna get there. So what I want to do is then I want to show you what is then possible with spatials data, with unicast data. And then I thought what would be fun would be to then talk about a third data set. So in the state of Iowa, not entirely sure of the whole reasoning behind it, but back in 2011, they passed a law that said every place that sells liquor must report down to the SKU level what they sold. And they have to do it day by day. And so what I'm going to show you right now. So if you go to, you can search for Iowa Open Data Liquor Sales Explorer, right? It's everybody's top search every single day. I know. But if you go search for this, you're going to kind of get to this site. And what you can see is you can see, okay, in Iowa, how much liquor was sold, what last quarter, right? But I'm getting to why this is really important here. So if you roll down, you can see the sales by product, right? So this is like the roll-ups of like all the Tito's handmade vodka, right? So it's all the different sizes, et cetera, rolled at the brand. But what I was really interested in was the top sales by store. And so since 2012, this Hy-Vee in Des Moines has sold over 135 million in liquor. And I was like pretty curious about this, just to say, what is it about this Hy-Vee? Like what makes it unique? So this is the power of what we can start to do together. So what you're looking at now, this is the Unicast Insights platform. And I said, where does this Hy-Vee rank among all the Hy-Vees in Iowa, right? Is it, I would expect you're selling $135 million of liquor since 2012. I would bet that you are the most trafficked on average Hy-Vee in Iowa. Well, you're not. It's number 6. No, not by much. And we can see that it's certainly over the mean and it's in the top quartile and all of those things, but it's not number 1. And that's kind of funky for being the store that sells the most of liquor. Now, there could be a lot of different reasons for this. They could sell the most shoes of anybody or whatever else, but kind of interesting. So then I got a little more curious about what's there. And what I got to was, excuse me for 1 sec, let me get my tabs right. What I got more curious about was, tell me a little bit more about who goes. Who goes to this? So what you're seeing now is you're seeing spatial AI's data on top of the visitation data for this Hy-Vee. So remember I told you all to remember that blue collar suburbs piece? Here we've got blue collar suburbs. These are blue collar suburbs in the Des Moines, Iowa area. Okay. We can see here's some demo data about them. Here's the income on it. But I wanted to pull back and then see a little bit more of what's possible with this. So now I understand, okay, it's the top selling liquor store. These are the kinds of people that go to that liquor store, or to that store that sells liquor, rather, because Hy-Vee sells a lot of stuff besides liquor. I wanted to get a view of what's around it and what's it like. So what you're seeing here, this big box with with all the cars in it, that's that Hy-Vee, right? And what we can see is that there's a bunch of co-located venues in here. It's a Dollar General there. Okay. So now I have a bunch of inputs, right? This is what I really have. I understand that there's a Hy-Vee. I understand it's high performing on this liquor. I can look at all the Hy-Vees if I really want to, right? We just did that where we compared a bunch of them. I can pull all this data down at once if I wanted to, and I can pull all the spatial data down with it. Okay, so what does that tell me? What can I actually do with that? And why am I telling you all this? What we have here is we have the makings of a predictive data set and a predictive model. Because if we go back to Iowa, and this is, by the way, this is the month-over-month stores at this Hy-Vee. We go all the way down here. What we can see is day by day at the brand level what they're selling. And by the way, you can extract all of this, drop straight into a CSV, right? Like ready to go. It's clean. It's ready to use. So now what I have since the beginning of time is I have the foot traffic data to this location. I could have the foot traffic data, all the Hy-Vee locations. I can see at the store level and at the product level what was sold, the quantity and the dollars of that. And I can see the segments. I now have the basis of everything to say, what should I see from a store with what kind of demography or psychographic makeup? What should I see in the next place? What should I see for seasonality as well? What should I expect? Because if I'm a retailer, this is why this all matters. Every one of these line items in here, the Casamigos Blanco, the Canadian Reserve whiskey, all of this stuff, that's money to me. This is all inventory that's got to sit on my shelves. And when that inventory gets dusty, that's inefficient inventory. And inefficient inventory means dollars of mine that are not rotating through, that aren't being put to good use. What I want, if I'm a retailer, is I want the right inventory at the right stores, which means having the right inventory for the right groups of people at the right times so that I don't have a whole bunch gathering dust on the shelf. If I have that, then I have really efficient inventory turnover, and really efficient inventory turnover means a really healthy cash flow business for me. pretty cool stuff. Okay, let me get back to our deck for a second. So I just wanted to give an example of like the kind of stuff that's possible. And this is only possible because these data sets are normalized, they're clean, they're ready to go. Again, what we're trying to aim for is a data scientist who has to engage with this data in a way that doesn't require them to spend all their time cleaning the data and prepping the data, right? Nobody wanted to spend all their time doing that. So what we thought we'd do is spend a few minutes with Mal. And Mal's a data scientist over here at Unicast, spends a lot of time with these data. We thought we'd throw a few questions at him just to kind of get things going. But
Yeah.
as mentioned, folks, don't hesitate to throw questions in the chat or in the Q&A. We can touch on those after we chat with Mal for a sec.
Sure.
All right, so Mal, let's start here. I just showed you this, this Iowa data set that I'm sure everybody on this call has been spending all of their time with, and all they've studied is the Iowa liquor sales, right? But it might be a new data set to somebody, right? When you as a data scientist, when you encounter a new data source that you want to go model with, right? Something like this, how do you approach it, especially relative to the kinds of data that we're talking about here?
Yeah, sure. So anytime that I'm looking at a new data source, the first and the most important thing that I'm going to consider is like, what are the new questions that I can answer? So you talked a little bit about combining transaction data and psychographic data. And if I can expand on that a little bit, you could, let's say we're going to open up a store in a new area. So I could look at my transaction data that I have for my current locations. I could look at stores that are currently located in that area and what kind of people those draw. And then I could say, okay, well, I've got this store that draws the same kind of people, and this item tends to sell well there. So maybe when I open up this new store, I should have this initial inventory, right? Or I could flip it around, and maybe there's a group that I know that I want to bring into my stores, and they're just not showing up. Well, now I can take my transaction data and I can go to stores where I do have those people, and I can see, okay, what am I selling there that they seem to like? Can I have a sale on that? Like, the biggest thing to remember is that data is just data. It doesn't have any inherent worth by itself. What's really valuable is what you can answer with it. That's where it brings something to my company and my like modeling techniques is what questions can I answer with the new data I get? So that is the first thing that I think about is how can I combine it with what I already have through Unicast and Spatial to answer new questions.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I keep jumping back to the like nobody wants to cleanse a data set, but there are lots of gotchas in this. What are some of the ones that you find in looking at data sets like this?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of times what can be gotchas are when you're looking at multiple data sets and they're telling you different but somewhat similar things. So Leiden earlier actually mentioned demographics versus psychographic data. And sometimes you can get information from those two sources that can contradict one another, right? So the thing to remember in this case is that my demographic data is coming from the census. It's updated. They put out a new model every year, but really the data is only refreshed at once every 10 years. And it tends to focus on things that the government cares about. So age, gender, ethnicity, some income data. There's a bunch more in the US Census if you want to take the time to go through it, but man, is it a pain. But it gives you like the who at a very basic level. Whereas psychographics is telling me about, and like the spatial AI data is telling me about the behavior. So I can have different psychographic segmentations inside of one census block group type of people. And so even though I may be getting some data that looks like it's conflicting between the two, and that can be very confusing because it seems like they're giving similar types of data, it's really the cross-section of those two and where I see the disagreements that can be the most useful because it's telling me what segments of people am I actually drawing and how are they behaving and acting. So it's important to keep in mind, especially when dealing with some of these more complicated data sets, exactly what each piece is bringing to the table, what it can say and what it can't say.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the core of this, right? Which is starting with a hypothesis, understanding what we're trying to actually get to, and can this data actually answer these kinds of questions, or can it lead me a little further down that road? But when we think about that, right, not all data comparisons are created equal, right? When you think about comparing these data, right, we're talking about, for example, retail visits to like this Hy-Vee in Des Moines, and Leiden showed some data about the same psychographic group, but in New York. Like, are there things we should probably be thinking about in terms of how we compare these data and how we think about these data?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background before I studied data science at Berkeley was statistics. So that was my undergrad focus, was in statistics. And so we have this concept in statistics of controlling for variables. So if I want to answer a question, I want to have the most variables that I possibly can, not fluctuating. There's a lot of biases that you can potentially run into in this data. The one that I always like to bring up is that I'm from Alaska. And so the entire north slope of Alaska, which is an area that's like a substantial fraction of the size of Texas, is one census block group. And in New York, a census block group might be like 4 city blocks, because those have the same size population. I would say the Alaska CBG is so large that sometimes it can break models if you don't know that it's there. Another bias is that it's much easier to capture data for stores where people tend to stay longer. So like a gas station where somebody's going to show up, fill up, and leave, that can be difficult to capture mobile data for sometimes. So there are biases. So my recommendation is always try to compare apples to apples whenever you can. So comparing the same brand across states is good, because now I'm eliminating brand as a variable and I'm just looking at the variation by state. Or if I want to compare different brands inside of the same state or even inside of the same city, this is great, because now I'm eliminating some of those cross-location problems. This isn't to say that you can't compare, say, a Home Depot in Washington State with a Lowe's in Florida, but if you're seeing something that's wildly different between the two, you're kind of not sure, is that because of a difference between Lowe's and Home Depot, or is it because of a difference between Washington and Florida? So just try to control for as many of them as you possibly can when you're doing any comparisons. That would be my big piece of advice.
Cool. All right. And if you had all right, you live this data all day long, play with this data all day long. You've got a bunch of folks who are pretty data science heavy, who are attending here. If you had to leave them with like one key tip, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, so if you've been around the analytics world or data science world for a long time, you've probably heard about the crisis that was had in the scientific community about a decade ago, where they realized that a bunch of these things that they were trying to prove turned out to not actually be statistically significant when they were tested again. And that can come from starting to look at your data without knowing what your hypothesis or without knowing what your question is first, and just kind of rummaging around and trying to find something. So the biggest piece of advice that I would give for somebody dealing with our data or dealing with location data in general is to sit down and put in the time before you start doing your analysis to figure out, what is the specific question that I want to answer with this data? Am I trying to figure out who my best performing demographic is? Am I trying to compare my own stores, compare my stores to my competitors? Am I trying to, figure out foot traffic for insurance purposes? Figure out what I'm trying to answer. Then figure out, what information do I actually need to gather to answer my questions? What am I expecting that I'm going to see? And then what is the action that I'm planning to take afterwards? And once I have all of those things answered, then I can go in and look at my data, and I can do it, and I can actually draw conclusions from it. Yeah, if you go in with that mindset, you're going to be much more likely to get something rewarding out of what you find.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mal.
No worries.
And Leiden, while I pop up the kind of just a slide here, like anything you would want to add on here?
No, other than I was shaking and nodding my head at everything Mel said. I was like, that's insights are fire here. So nothing new to add.
Cool. Well, this has been awesome. I hope this has been helpful for our folks who've joined today. Our goal here was really to talk about how kind of, the chocolate and peanut butter come together to make Reese's and what's really, really possible here. I want to share to explore more. We've got a link here. I know Leiden and myself are available. We've got teams behind us that are available as well. We're here to help. From my from my vantage point, I think the more we really understand the real world and how people move through the real world and who those people are, leads us to some pretty cool places. It leads to better communities. It leads to stores that serve people better, right? Because there's nothing worse than going into a store and it doesn't have anything that you want in it, right? Like when you are on a mission to get a thing. And that makes people like just have better days. And I think that's pretty cool, right? Everybody wins when our communities are a little better. So I love this stuff. Leiden, anything you want to add before we close things out?
No, just double clicking on the beauty of how Unicast has packaged this up as a singular data set that is not required to join, not required to munge, and it's plug and play. You can run with it, and that really gets me excited because speed to insight is critical.
Totally. Well, cool, folks. Thank you so much for coming today. I hope folks found this really helpful. I'm sure we'll follow with an email with everything in here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.